Welcome to episode 17 of Islam in the Contemporary World, a new narrative. Justice, tolerance, protection of minorities. These are not just modern ideals, they're core Islamic values. But have we as a global Muslim community lost sight of them? Let's journey through Zafarullah Khan's reflections to uncover what went wrong and how we can return to what's right. So, in this deep dive, we're really looking at the perspective Zafarullah Khan offers in his writings. He takes a pretty critical look at where things stand for Muslims today, especially around justice, tolerance, and how minorities are treated compared to what he sees as, well, fundamental Islamic teachings in history.
That's right. And Khan digs deep into sources, the Quran, key historical moments, documents. Our job here is to really try and understand the stark contrast he's drawing.
A contrast between the original principles and what often happens now in the modern world.
Exactly. We need to unpack his arguments, look at the specific evidence he uses to build his case.
Okay, so let's dive straight into the problem then, as Khan sees it. He kicks off with a really powerful claim. He says Islam, which he believes was meant as a mercy for everyone, with potential to even lead modern development, has instead been, well, horribly misused, is how he puts it.
Misused? How does he mean? Like, in what way?
He argues it's been twisted into a tool for things like exploitation, for keeping people in poverty, and even, shockingly, for terror, citing things like homicide.
Wow, that's a really strong charge that something intended for mercy is being used for, well, destruction.
It really is. And he doesn't just stop at the symptoms. He tries to diagnose the cause, the root of the problem.
And what does he pinpoint?
According to Khan, the fundamental issue is that Muslims are, in his words, stuck to the past. They lack what he calls real ijtehad.
Ijtehad, that's the independent reasoning, isn't it? The intellectual effort to interpret the texts and apply principles to new situations.
Exactly. The kind of thinking needed for the modern world. He's saying that ability, or maybe the willingness to do it effectively, it's just missing.
So it's not about abandoning tradition, but failing to think creatively and adapt based on those traditions.
Precisely. And the consequence of this kind of intellectual gridlock.
Well, he argues it stops Muslims from creating a truly peaceful and prosperous life, the kind of modern existence he sees as authentically Islamic. The stagnation, it holds the community back from reaching its potential.
And he issues a pretty direct call to action, doesn't he? It sounds almost like an alarm bell.
Oh, absolutely. He urges Muslims to arise out of deep slumber, to reform themselves. He's quite insistent they need to consciously decide how we want to be in this world.
And show it through actions, not just talk.
Yes, through actions and deeds. And he even brings in a warning from the Quran, doesn't he? Chapter 9, verse 4.
Right. What's the implication there?
He suggests that if this reform doesn't happen, if the community doesn't change course through its actions, they could face, divine consequences, maybe even being replaced. It's a serious spiritual challenge tied directly to their behavior.
Okay, so that paints the picture of the problem. Misuse stemming from being stuck. But to really get what's being misused, Khan goes back to basics, to the core principles. What are these values he highlights that seem neglected?
He starts with a really fundamental concept for how a Muslim society should relate to non-Muslims living within it. It's called the covenant, or dhimma.
Dhimma, that's the agreement, the guarantee of safety.
Yep.
And dhimmi are the people covered by it.
Exactly. Khan really stresses that Islam puts a strong, a non-negotiable duty on Muslims to protect and be fair to non-Muslim minorities. It's framed as a religious obligation, a sacred trust.
And this fairness, it goes way beyond just minorities, right?
Yeah.
Justice is a huge theme in the Quran.
Huge, absolutely foundational. He points to Quran 4.135, which is incredibly powerful. It tells believers to stand out firmly for justice as witnesses to Allah.
Even as against yourselves, or your parents, or your kin, and whether it be against rich or poor.
Yeah, think about that. Even against yourself, your family.
That's a tough standard. It means justice can't be about who you know or who you're related to.
Right. It demands total impartiality, even if it hurts you personally or goes against people close to you. Rich or poor, doesn't matter. Justice has to be blind.
And then there's that other really challenging verse, Quran 5.8. This one's about dealing with people you actually dislike, even hate.
Let not the hatred of others to you make you swerve to wrong and depart from justice. Be just. That is next to piety.
So personal feelings, even hatred, should never lead to injustice.
Exactly. Khan emphasizes that Islam commands justice even towards enemies. And that phrase, be just, that is next to piety, It elevates justice to being almost like the definition of religious devotion itself. It's central.
He also brings in Quran 60.8, showing this kindness extends to non-Muslims who aren't fighting you.
Yes, Allah forbids you not from dealing kindly and justly with them, for Allah loveth those who are just. So it's not just don't be unjust. It's actively be kind and fair as long as they're not hostile.
And Khan adds context to that other verse, 4.135, right, about a specific case.
He does. He mentions it relates to an incident where the Prophet Muhammad himself ruled in favor of a Jewish person against a Muslim accuser. This shows the principle applied across religious lines, even back then.
In keeping these promises, these covenants, is also commanded directly, Quran 16.91.
Fulfill the covenant of Allah and break not your oaths. And Khan shows this wasn't just theory. He mentions Caliph Umar reportedly telling his successors to observe the contract with non-Muslims, protect them, fight on their behalf, and, importantly, not burden them unfairly.
It shows the early leadership really saw it as a protective duty.
Definitely.
And there's the whole issue of religious tolerance. Islam seems very clear on no forced conversions.
Extremely clear. Quran 2.256 is probably the most famous verse on this. Let there be no compulsion in religion. Simple as that.
And what about engaging with other faiths?
Well, Quran 29.46 advises engaging with the people of the book, Jews and Christians, with what it calls means better than mere disputation. So, promoting respectful dialogue over just arguing.
And underneath all this, Khan touches on broader themes, like the unity of all humanity from Quran 49.13.
And respect for all prophets in 2.136, and the idea of brotherhood among believers in 49.10.
So it paints this picture of a faith grounded in respect, justice, fulfilling promises, even across religious divides.
Right. These texts form the ethical foundation that Khan argues should be guiding Muslims today, both internally and externally.
Okay, so those are the principles. But the really crucial bit in Khan's argument, I think, is how he shows these weren't just words on paper. He points to actual history.
Yes, and this is where it gets fascinating, maybe even eye-opening for some listeners. Khan describes how early Islamic civilization didn't just, put up with non-Muslims. They gave them real autonomy.
Like self-governance.
Yeah, judicial, social, cultural. He explains how different communities, Jews, Christians, others, were often allowed to have their own courts using their own laws.
Their own laws.
Yeah.
Not just for family matters.
Apparently covering a wide range, civil, criminal, religious. That kind of legal pluralism within one state is pretty remarkable for its time.
And he uses the Charter of Madina as a prime example, right from the very beginning.
It's key. This agreement between the first Muslims and other groups in Medina basically called them all one nation ummah, one political community, despite different religions.
And it promised equality.
Social, legal, economic equality for everyone loyal to the pact. And the guarantees were specific, things like no Jew will be wronged for being a Jew. The Jews have their religion.
Mutual defense, too, right? And advice.
Yes. Mutual help against attackers, mutual advice. It set up a framework for living together, protecting rights, while respecting different identities.
And this protection extended to personal beliefs and even welfare.
He mentions the right of, say, a Christian or Jewish wife of a Muslim to keep her own faith. And then there's this amazing example from a peace treaty with a place called Hira.
What happened there?
The treaty apparently included a clause saying the Islamic government's treasury would provide for non-Muslims in that area who couldn't work because of age, disability, poverty.
Wow. So the state treasury providing social welfare for non-Muslim citizens.
Yeah.
That's a powerful statement of responsibility.
It really is. It goes beyond just tolerance. It's active care seen as the state's duty under the covenant.
And Khan uses the Prophet Muhammad's own actions as a powerful example. There's that story about the Christian delegation from Najran.
Ah, yes, that one's incredible.
Huh.
Khan recounts how the Prophet welcomed this Christian group, let them stay near the mosque, and, this is the stunning part, allowed them to conduct their own worship inside the Prophet's mosque in Medina.
They prayed their way towards the east, right there.
Right there in the mosque courtyard.
That's hard to imagine today in many places.
Sure.
Khan makes a specific point about why the Prophet did this, doesn't he?
He does. He anticipates the argument that maybe it was because Muslims were weak then. But Khan points out this happened after Muslims had become quite powerful, just before conquering Makkah. The Najran delegation was the weaker party.
So it wasn't political necessity.
No, Khan argues it was the opposite. It was a deliberate act of good manners, courtesy, and genuine tolerance. A display of values from a position of strength, not weakness.
That single story really challenges assumptions. And then there's that very stark hadith he quotes.
The one about killing someone under covenant?
Yeah. One who kills a man under covenant, i.e. a dhimmi, will not even smell the fragrance of paradise.
That puts a massive spiritual weight on upholding that protection. It shows how seriously the violation of the covenant was viewed.
And we see this same spirit in Caliph Umar's famous charter for Jerusalem in 638 AD.
Right when the city surrendered. That charter guaranteed security for people's lives, property, churches, crosses, all that concerns their religion.
With specific promises like churches wouldn't be destroyed or taken over.
Exactly. And no constraint shall be put on them in the matter of their faith, nor shall any one of them be harmed. Very explicit guarantees.
So Khan lays out this history. The Medina Charter, creating a shared community, the Hira Treaty showing social care, the Prophet's personal example of welcome, the strong warning against harm, Umar's charter ensuring religious freedom. He presents these as the standard derived from the core principles.
Precisely. He uses this historical backdrop to show what living those values looked like in practice, especially when Muslims held power.
Which, of course, leads directly back to his critique of the present day. He asks that tough question, do Muslims treat minorities like this today? And his answer is a flat no.
He calls the current treatment abhorrent. But then he widens the lens, saying we even have strange behavior toward fellow Muslims.
This is where he gets into that really painful issue of Muslims falsely accusing other Muslims, labeling them non-Muslims or heretics.
Yes, he sees it used as a pressure tactic, or just based on rumors, causing immense harm. It's a direct violation of the very principles of justice he's been outlining, but happening within the community.
And he gives us two personal stories that really drive it home. The first was his own experience in Umarkat.
Right, when he was an assistant commissioner, he took action against a religious group for breaking meeting rules, and even though he made sure they were treated humanely.
Posters appeared calling him Qadiani.
Exactly, a label with potentially devastating consequences in that society.
Which could ruin someone.
Absolutely. Luckily for him, local religious figures who knew him stepped up and debunked it. But it shows how easily these accusations can fly.
And the second story about the public servant.
Yeah. Described as a devout man from a religious family, he did his job, reported corruption involving a politician.
And the politician retaliated.
Published a book falsely accusing the public servant of being Qadiani. And then, Khan says, religious parties just picked up the accusation, no proof, no investigation, just repeated it.
Causing terrible hardship for the man and his family.
Terrible hardship.
And Khan tried to intervene. He talked to some religious elders about it.
He did. He went to elders from the party spreading the claims. But their response was, well, basically that the accused man needed to disprove the accusation himself.
They put the burden of proof entirely on the victim.
That's how Khan describes it. He argued back, saying, Islamic justice demands the accuser provides evidence. He stressed the need to investigate, not just run with hearsay, pleaded for the man's dignity.
How did they react?
He says his arguments fell flat on them, and he was so pained by this, he recited a verse from the poet Faiz Ahmad Faiz.
What was the verse about?
It contrasts the prophet's compassion, his mantle supposedly wet with tears for the poor, with religious leaders spitting fire of wrath and rebuke against them.
Oof. That image really hits hard. It captures that gap he sees between the example of the prophet and some current religious figures.
It perfectly underlines his core frustration. If Islam is about mercy and justice, why are some of its followers, even leaders, causing such pain and injustice even to each other?
And he leaves us hanging with those really sharp questions. Is this what Islam teaches us? Is it right that we make life for someone unbearable without any investigation or evidence?
For Khan, these aren't rhetorical. They're a direct challenge, demanding that Muslim practices today actually match up with the values and the history he's laid out.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive into Zafarullah Khan's perspective, he paints this vivid picture of historical Islamic ideals, justice, tolerance, the covenant protecting minorities.
Ideals backed by historical practice.
And then he puts that right alongside what he sees as major failures today, using these really quite harrowing personal stories to show the human cost of deviating from those principles, especially with false accusations among Muslims.
And his diagnosis is clear. This intellectual stagnation, being stuck in the past without real ijtehad, stops Muslims from living their faith properly in the modern age. It leads to misusing a religion meant for mercy. His call is for reform, for actions that reflect the true values.
It's definitely been quite a journey through Khan's analysis and the history he presents. We've seen these powerful historical benchmarks, the Charters of Medina and Jerusalem, showing a commitment to justice and protection, even from a position of power.
Yeah.
And then we hear his contemporary accounts, which feels so far removed from that.
It does make you stop and think, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So, thinking about Khan's analysis, if that historical practice really prioritized justice and protection as a religious duty, what does he suggest is blocking that today? And what might his call to arise out of deep slumber and reform actually mean for you listening now, especially given the challenges he describes, like that internal injustice and division?